Welcome to Life Beyond the Ladder, a podcast created to help you design a second act you can't wait to live. I'm your midlife reinvention guide, Dalisia Coppersmith. And in case you missed the first couple of episodes, I'll catch you up. We've been pulling back the curtain on some of the most common and quietly painful experiences of midlife. We talked about the arrival trap, which is that moment when you've climbed the ladder and realize that the view from the top isn't quite what you expected. And last episode, we talked about visibility, what it means to be overlooked by a culture that used to pay attention to you, and why that might actually be your greatest professional advantage right now. Today, we're going even deeper. We're going to talk about something that lives underneath both of those experiences, something that shapes how you show up at work, even at home, and in your relationships, and in the quiet moments when no one's watching. We're going to talk about the roles you're playing and whether you even chose them. I want to start with a question, and I'd love for you to sit with this for a moment before we go any further. So if you have something, you can jot this down. That would be great. You can even journal later on when you have a chance. But think about your life right now, the way you spend your days, the things you say yes to, the things you absorb without being asked, ways you show up for other people, and the space you take up. How about the space you quietly give away? Now ask yourself, who wrote this part I'm playing every day? This is what I've noticed in working with women at this stage of life. A significant portion of what most of us are doing on any given day, the roles we're filling, the identities we're carrying around, the expectations that we're meeting, were never actually chosen by us. They were handed to us by our families, by our cultures, our organizations, in our relationships. And somewhere along the way, we picked them up and we started playing them so naturally. We got so good at them that we forgot we'd never auditioned for the part. There's a real difference between the roles we inherit and the roles we choose. They feel different, from the inside. Once you know what to look for, an inherited role usually arrives gradually. You barely even notice it happening. It starts with a moment of need. Somebody needed something and you were there. You handled it because you're capable or because you care. And it was easier for you to do it than to explain why you couldn't or to explain to someone else how to do it. And then you handled it again and again. And slowly, without any formal agreement, you became the person who handles that thing, the one who manages the family logistics, the one who absorbs the emotional weight at the office, the one who keeps everything running so smoothly that no one even notices it's running. But a chosen role feels different. It comes from desire, not obligation. It comes from something inside you that genuinely wants to be there, wants to do this thing, wants to build this. When you're in a chosen role, the energy moves toward it. When you're in an inherited role, the energy moves away from it. Or worse, it just quietly drains. And we've all felt that before. So the question isn't whether inherited roles are bad. Some of them are deeply meaningful. Some of them are expressions of love. But there's a real difference between choosing to care for someone and slowly becoming invisible inside the act of caring. There's a difference between stepping into a leadership role because you want the responsibility and staying in it long past the point where it still fits who you are. So how do you tell the difference? How do you spot an imposed identity before it becomes so familiar you mistake it for yourself? Here's the clearest test that I know of. Ask yourself, if I could put this down tomorrow, if I could simply stop doing this, stop being this, or stop showing up in this particular way, would I feel relief or loss? Relief is the signal. Relief means some part of you has been waiting to be released from this. Relief means the role was never really you. It was just something you were doing. Loss. If you feel loss, that means something different. Loss means this role matters to you in a genuine way. even if it's hard, even if it costs you something, even if it's not perfect. Here's the harder question. What are you afraid will happen if you put the script down? Because most of us, if we're honest, know exactly which roles we've inherited. We feel it. We feel the weight of the things we carry that we never consciously agreed to carry. We know which obligations are chosen and which ones we just kept saying yes to because no one else did. But we kept playing the part anyway. And I think the real reason is fear, not necessarily like a feeling of failure or a fear of conflict, but something much more fundamental. We're afraid that if we stop playing this role, something important will fall apart, or someone will be hurt, or will be seen as selfish, like as someone who cares only about herself. So we're afraid that the identity we've been playing for so long is the only identity anyone knows how to love. Because I think that's at the heart of what keeps women just trudging along at this stage of life. The fear isn't really about the role. The fear is about the relationship between the role and your worth. As if the moment you stop being everything to everyone, you become nothing to anyone. And that fear is totally understandable. It makes sense given, how most of us were raised and what we were taught about what a good woman looks like. But I want to challenge it gently but directly. The people who love you for the role are loving a performance. The people who love you for you will stick around. They will still be there when the performance ends. And the people you're most afraid of disappointing, they may surprise you. So let me share a few women who surprised themselves. The first, we'll call her Patricia. She'd been the family organizer for 30 plus years. Every holiday, every birthday, every crisis, every logistical challenge that touched her family and her extended family passed through her hands. She was the one everyone called. She always figured it out, and she was exhausted in a way she didn't have words for because she never actually decided, at least not consciously, to take this job on forever. She just never said no to it. So we ran a little experiment. At 51, she stopped. Not dramatically, not all at once. She just stopped volunteering. She stopped reaching out first. She stopped solving problems that really weren't hers to solve anyway. And she braced for the fallout. So what do you think happened? Here's what happened. A few of her family members were annoyed briefly. One called her to ask why the holiday coordination hadn't been set out yet. And I think she said so pleasantly. She said she wasn't doing it this year. And then guess what? Someone else did. Not as smoothly as she would have, not as thoroughly, but they got it done. And Patricia spent that holiday season doing something she hadn't done in decades. She rested. She started a project she'd been putting off for years, a creative project that she wanted to do. And, she'd been so afraid the family would fall apart without her holding everything together. What she discovered instead, and hopefully you're leaning in and guessing this, but what she discovered was that she'd been robbing them of the chance to grow up and take some responsibility. So I know another woman, we'll call her Diane. And Diane spent 20-ish years in a career that she was very good at, but hadn't really chosen. She was kind of steered into it by a mentor early in her life. And, all the good advice that comes to you, where you can make money and use your skills according to some chart. And she'd been successful enough that it became who she was. Her title, her expertise, her reputation, all that built in a field that never really excited her. So at 54, she admitted it to herself out loud. But she didn't quit the next day. She didn't blow anything up. She started doing something she'd been told wasn't practical. She started paying attention to what actually lit her up. She took a course in something that had nothing to do with her career whatsoever. She started having conversations in a different direction than she had been. And she forged some new friendships based on common interests. So she really, stretched beyond that role in several different ways. And slowly over about 2 years, she built a second track, one that was entirely hers. She told me that the scariest moment was the first time she introduced herself using a different description, a description that was true, not just impressive, and that the world didn't end when she described herself differently, gave herself a different title. When people say, "What do you do?" or "Tell me about yourself," what if you just invented something completely different? Well, she did. In fact, the right people leaned in. And both of these women had the same experience on the other side of putting the script down. They found more room to breathe, to think, more room to remember who they were before someone else's story became the whole of their identity. So that room is waiting for you too. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it's easy to do this. It's hard to change ourselves. It's certainly hard to change others' expectations, but we can do this because if we're not happy with where we are, if the role doesn't seem to fit anymore, if we feel like we're playing a part that we didn't ask for, changing the roles you play, especially the ones that are woven into your closest relationships, it takes real courage and real care. Not about abandoning the people who need you. It's about renegotiating honestly and kindly the terms of how you show up. It's about deciding which roles you want to carry into your second act because you genuinely want them, because they feed you, because they're an expression of who you actually are, and which ones you've simply been carrying out of habit or guilt or someone else's story about who you're supposed to be. So you don't have to play every part that's been handed forever. You're allowed to rewrite this. So here's what I'd like to leave you with. Which parts of your current roles did you actually choose? Now, you can think about this, but I'd prefer that you journal because there's a different experience. All right. So either write it down or do this in a voice memo to yourself and go through this conversation. Which parts of your current roles did you actually choose? Not which parts are meaningful to you. Some of the inherited roles can be deeply meaningful, but just simply which parts did you consciously, freely, genuinely choose? Which parts would you walk into even if no one expected it of you? And let yourself simmer in that list. And then if you're feeling brave, pick up one role you've been playing without choosing and ask yourself what it would look like to renegotiate it. Totally possible. Not to eliminate it necessarily. It might be something that you want to do and have to do, but just renegotiate it on your terms because the script that you've been handed doesn't contain the only possible outcome. And the second act that you're designing right now, it should be written in your own hand, not someone else's. I'm Dalisia Coppersmith, and this is Life Beyond the Ladder. I'll see you again soon.